So you've probably heard about Project 2025. It's this massive, nearly 900-page document called the Mandate for Leadership. And a lot of people are calling it a detailed blueprint for a potential new conservative administration. The real question is, what's actually inside this thing?
To really get our heads around this plan, we're going to break it down. We'll start with where it came from, then dig into its core mission. After that, we'll look at how it plans to restructure the government, zero in on some key policy changes, and then zoom out to see its vision for America's role in the world and its ultimate goal.
So where did this idea even come from? Well, Project 2025 isn't some brand new concept. It actually has some pretty deep roots in a similar effort from decades ago.
Yeah, this is not just a theoretical exercise. The original Mandate for Leadership was written way back in 1981 for the Reagan administration. And get this, according to the project's own authors, by the end of that first year, over 60% of its proposals had become actual policy. Project 2025 sees itself as the direct successor to that very influential playbook. Okay, now let's get to the heart of it. When you boil down all 900 of those pages, you find one central target, something the authors call the administrative state. The mandate has a very specific definition for the administrative state. It's not just one agency or department, it's the whole ecosystem, all the federal departments and their millions of employees who do the day-to-day work of making and implementing policy. You can think of it as the permanent machinery of government. And the plan doesn't mince words about its goal. The document states that dismantling this administrative state must be a top priority. So we're not talking about small tweaks here. This is a call for a complete and total overhaul. So why this mission? What's the problem they're trying to solve? Well, the mandate argues that over many decades, Congress has passed these really broad laws and then just left the details to federal agencies. The result, they say, is that unelected officials, not our elected representatives, are the ones actually making the rules. The goal of Project 2025 is to pull that power back and put it squarely under the control of the president. Which brings us to the how. How exactly does the mandate plan to dismantle this administrative state? Well, the whole strategy is a top-down reassertion of presidential authority. The strategy really breaks down into 4 clear steps. First, the president would use the full force of executive authority granted by the Constitution. Second, key White House offices that control the budget and federal hiring, think OMB and OPM, would become the central command centers. Third, political appointees would be given the clear power to direct career staff. And finally, everything from performance reviews to bonuses would be used to make sure the entire federal workforce is on the same page as the new administration's agenda.
So that's the high-level strategy, but what does it actually look like on the ground? The mandate gets super specific, with a department-by-department plan for change. Let's take a look at 3 big examples. First up, the Department of Justice. The mandate outlines a pretty significant shift in how the DOJ would operate and what it would focus on. Okay, so the plan would refocus the Civil Rights Division to investigate state governments and corporations. It also suggests moving election fraud investigations over to the Criminal Division. And another key piece is that it would reject investigation requests from outside groups if they're seen as politically motivated, keeping that decision-making power inside the department. All right, next, let's look at the Department of Homeland Security. You know, it was created after 9/11 and has grown into this massive organization. For DHS, the mandate proposes some major structural changes. One big one is creating a political-only line of succession. That means if a leader is absent, a political appointee, not a career expert, would take over. It also floats this idea of a soft close for offices deemed ineffective, basically shifting their people and money elsewhere. And it suggests the Secret Service should focus almost entirely on protection, moving away from its role in investigating financial crime. And for our last policy example, let's turn to the Department of Health and Human Services, a department that was, front and center during the COVID-19 pandemic. The proposals for HHS show a really clear intention to reverse a lot of recent policies. The plan calls for getting rid of federal mask and vaccine mandates from the COVID era. It would bring back and expand a policy restricting U.S. foreign aid to organizations involved with abortion. It also calls for a full audit of the Hyde Amendment, that's the rule blocking federal funds for most abortions, and would pull back guidance related to emergency abortions and gender transition procedures. Now, the mandate's scope isn't just domestic. Not at all. It spends a lot of time on foreign policy, proposing a major reassessment of America's role on the world stage. A really central theme here is a whole new approach to China. The document is critical of the last 30 years of policy, saying it embraced and enriched China. The proposed shift? To see China not just as a competitor, but, quote, more of a threat,
which would demand a new, cost-imposing strategic response to its actions.
And beyond China, the plan calls for a big reevaluation of all our international commitments. This means ending what it calls blind support for international organizations, and even pulling out of ones seen as ineffective or working against U.S. interests. It also suggests consolidating all foreign aid to better serve U.S. policy goals, and focusing that aid on a, quote, coalition of the cooperative, basically nations that are aligned with the U.S. So after all these specific policy changes and structural overhauls, what's the ultimate vision? What's the big philosophical idea that's driving this entire 900-page plan? This quote, right from the mandate's introduction, really gets to the heart of the whole project. It defines the government's proper role as securing our rights so we can enjoy free enterprise and liberty. This is the bedrock principle that connects all the changes we've just talked about. So to wrap it all up, Project 2025's mandate for leadership isn't just a grab bag of policy ideas. It's a comprehensive, incredibly detailed plan to fundamentally transform the federal government and, in the view of its authors, restore what they see as the nation's original constitutional framework. And that leaves us with a final question. This document lays out one of the most detailed and ambitious blueprints for changing the government that we've ever seen. So the question it raises for all of us, no matter our politics, is this: what would be the impact of actually putting a plan like this into action?